then, we study everything from, I always say that politics starts from the ground up, right? Not, theory doesn't come from the top down, right? So we really start with, real people's lives, right? And then go from there. And I think, that is very distinct from the ways in which most courses that are focused on theory are taught.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with a new guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Dr. Ola Osman. I am an assistant professor of African politics here at the Department of Politics and International Studies and a fellow of African politics at Trinity Hall.
Nice. And we're here today to talk about studying politics at Cambridge, how students can do that, what different courses that we offer here. If I was an applicant and I was wanting to study politics, how can I do that at Cambridge?
Yeah, so Cambridge offers two different paths for studying politics. The one path is studying politics, sociology, and social anthropology. And the other path that you can take is studying politics and history.
Nice. And for the human, social, and political sciences one, the HSPS, can you explain because I think a lot of people hear about HSPS but not really sure what each of the components are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So HSPS stands for Human, Social, and Political Sciences, right? And then you also have like the HISPOL track, right? Yeah. But for HSPS, you get to study politics and international relations, right? Yeah. That's where you get to explore politics between countries, between states, right? How different states behaves and how political actors within those states behave, right? So that's the politics aspect, right? And then there's a social anthropology aspect, right? That's really about what it is to be human, right? And that's a space for folks who are really interested in kind of the evolution of culture in human societies, right? And then the final part is sociology, right? And sociology is the social study of society, right? How folks interact, right? And also how organizations interact, right? And mapping the kind of dimensions of power that exist within that.
Nice. And before we go into the course structure for HSPS, I'm just quite curious of what would you say the main difference are between doing a HSPS course or doing history and politics? So
if you're doing a HSPS, then you are someone who's interested in kind of contemporary political questions around, say, like democracy, financial crises. You're someone who's really interested in garnering the tools to understand what's happening in today's society. I think if you are someone who does HISPOL, you're actually interested in the kind of trajectory of how we came to be in this political moment, right? So it's more historically focused on mapping the evolution of political systems.
Nice. So if you were an individual who was interested in both things, what advice would you have for that applicant? Because I imagine a lot of people would be quite curious for both.
Oh my gosh, that's actually a hard question. I think that if you are someone who is particularly good with historical narrative, with telling stories, and an avid reader, right? History is always the way to go. I think, if you're struggling to pick between the two, I personally would go with HSPS, right? Because there's more flexibility in it, right? In terms of the kinds of courses that you get to choose, right? Of course, in the first year, you have to take the kind of four main, the history, the Poll 2 and Poll 1, which is the international relations course, the political theory course, right? And you kind of get an overview, and then you get to kind of focus, right? By the end, you know something really in depth, right? As the years go on. So I think, if you're not sure about which one, I would start with HSPS.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I was also wondering, you'd shed some light on how the HSPS course is structured. Are students going to be doing all four aspects of the course, or is there opportunities to specialize?
Yeah, so in your first year, you kind of get an opportunity to survey, right? So you have to take politics, you have to take international relations, which is what I teach, and then you get to take sociology and social anthropology. And then during the second year, students get to narrow their focus a little bit, right, and either choose a single subject or a joint subject track. And then by the final year, they get to graduate with a kind of deeper sense of expertise in one or two specific subjects.
Nice. And another common question that we get, especially for HSPS, is given that applicants can choose 5 universities and most universities offer like a straight politics course, wondering what the differences are between HSPS and a straight politics course elsewhere, and would other universities that offer politics also necessarily include sociology in their course?
So I think that the way that Cambridge has structured its program is particularly unique, right? Most political science programs are very traditional.
Okay.
But Cambridge is really interdisciplinary, right? So you have Polis, right, which is the Politics and International Studies department, but it houses several different centers, right? So I did my PhD here, but I did mine in Polis, but also at the Center for Gender Studies, right? They have the Center for African Studies, right? The Center for Human Rights and Governance, right? So there's an opportunity to be really interdisciplinary in a way that other political science departments might not allow for.
Nice. So for a lot of applicants watching might not know what a traditional political sciences kind of ethos, what that means. I was wondering if you could shed some light on.
Yeah. So traditional political science, this depends, right, largely on where you are in the world, right? So if, in the States, it's different insofar as it's very oriented towards numbers, right?
Yeah.
Versus in the UK, most political science degrees in the UK would be focused on the study of like political institutions, comparative government, international relations, without requiring any serious engagement with the kind of human aspect of it, right? So sociology, social anthropology, right? Some might offer sociology modules as add-ons, but it doesn't form the kind of core component of the course in and of itself.
Nice. That sounds really interesting. And kind of on the flip side, I imagine most straight politics courses elsewhere might not offer critical theory as a part of their course. I was wondering if you could shed some light on what critical theory is and how you can learn about it in the HSPS course.
Yeah. So critical theory, this kind of took me back to basics because it's kind of inherent to what it is that I do, right? But really, it's this idea that, it comes out of the 1930s moment, right, at the Frankfurt School in Germany. But really what it says is that there's this kind of unspoken promise in society that, buying into a society allows for the folks that make up that society to live a quote unquote good life, right? And there's a kind of rational logic that undergirds it that critical theorists kind of take up and say, it might... this unspoken promise that, if you buy into this society, that you will kind of have access to the good life is fine if as an ideal, right? But the truth is, if we actually look at the way that society is functioning, the good life doesn't actually extend to everybody. Right, so critical theory then produces folks who come out of post-colonial theory, right? Black studies, women's studies, right? So folks who are studying inequality through multiple lenses, right? So really at its core, critical theory is actually asking us to reconsider the very kind of lenses that we've traditionally used to study society and think them anew.
Nice. And you can do that in the HSPS course?
Absolutely. I think that it, depending on the kind of lecturer, of course, for the first year, you might get, the kind of core canonical readings that you have to do, but there's always an opportunity to do additional reading. We actually encourage you to do additional reading, right? Where, there's like a literal section called additional reading in every paper guide that you will come across, right? But you can always ask your lecturers for additional readings that are more critical, and we're happy to give those.
Nice, amazing. Yeah. And this is another question, kind of trying to help students who are on the fence between history and politics and HSPS, but I was wondering what you thought about whether it's more important to study politics with a sociological/social anthropology background, or an appreciation with the historical context.
Yeah, this is a really difficult question for me to answer, because I don't think that you can really do one or the other, and that in some way both are going to bleed into each other, right? I think it's more a question of how much time do you want to spend on history, right, as opposed to kind of analyzing our current political moment, or the past couple of decades, right, versus one that's kind of going to focus on, 16th century and like the development of the modern world, right? So I think it really is a question of how much historical work you want to do.
Yeah. That does make sense. Yeah. So if someone was they really want to do history and they also want to do politics, then the history and politics one would make a lot of sense. Yeah. Another thing that we have that is quite common is, so if anyone who doesn't know, in a given year, if you're interested in courses at Cambridge and Oxford University, you can only apply to one of the universities. You could apply for one in 1 year and another in the second year if you want to be successful in your first year. Yeah. So that means that a lot of students are end up thinking about HSPS at Cambridge or PP at Oxford, and was wondering if you had any advice for applicants who are trying to choose between those two courses.
Yeah, not advice, but I think I can kind of draw the distinction between both, right? Yeah. So PPE is built around 3 distinct disciplines, right? So, and you get to study them alongside one another for the most part. So you get philosophy, right? And that typically stands alone. And then you get economics, right? Which is also a substantial component of it. And it's much more technical. And it's kind of seen as a degree that's been a route to politics, journalism, and finance, right? And then HSPS is a little less fixed in that way. So it's really about kind of developing an integrated understanding of society. And, you're not studying kind of economics as a discipline in its own right. You might actually study, the sociology of it, or political economy, right? So you'll always encounter kind of similar questions that you would in, PPE, right? But just through a different lens, right? And then PPE doesn't have a social anthropology component at all. So if you were interested in kind of studying questions of culture in different societies, then I would say go with HSPS, right? But if that's not something that matters to you at all, and you kind of wanted to develop a technical understanding, then I would say go with PPE.
Nice. I'm not sure if PPE has a sociology component, but it's worth checking that if you're watching. Another question I wanted to ask was, some applicants might lean towards PPE in that they want to do philosophy and politics, but wanted to ask if there were opportunities to study philosophy in the HSPS course.
Absolutely. I think philosophy just shows up everywhere, right? I think that a lot of the kind of readings that, at least that I assign, right, especially in kind of feminist or readings that come out of feminist research, right, or readings that come out of Black studies or African studies, right, there's always a philosophical component, right, about the kind of nature of knowledge and knowledge production, right, and then also questions about being, right, and who gets to be human, right, in the kind of political context in which we're embedded, right. So I think that if you do have an interest in philosophy, it'll always show up, because all of these thinkers are thinking with the kind of core philosophers, right? Like folks like Hegel and Habermas, and right. So I think yeah, it'll always show up.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. And I think it's an important point to make, because I think when someone thinks of HSPS, they might think because it doesn't have the word philosophy,
Yeah.
it doesn't have a philosophical component, but that's just not the case.
No, I think it actually, weirdly enough, I actually think it might form the kind of epistemic core of a lot of, the things that students will engage with, right? But it's not explicitly named.
No, yeah. And there will definitely be people who will hear the words Hegel and Habermas and immediately be drawn to the course. Now moving towards your research interests, I was wondering if you could share with us what kind of work that you do.
Yeah. So I was trained in women's studies. So I did my master's at Oxford in their women's studies program. And then I moved over to Cambridge to do my PhD at the Center for Gender Studies. And my research for my PhD looked at the relationship between transatlantic slavery and what are often called Africa's forever wars, right? So really what I wanted to do was develop a kind of theory of anti-Blackness and racial Blackness that kind of extended beyond the space of the Americas, right? To then use that theory to understand how, these forever wars, which are understood as ethnic wars, right, or ethnically motivated, are actually rooted in questions of race, right, that were introduced by plantation slavery, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really what my dissertation focused on, with a specific focus on Liberia and the Back to Africa movement, right? Because that offered a quintessential kind of case study for me, because you had, African-American folks who would have been free or freed enslaved people who moved over in the 1820s or were repatriated, right? And you got these kind of dynamics, right, that were very much racial in tone that developed between this group of repatriated folks and Indigenous Africans, right, where they kind of saw each other in racial terms, even though they were all Blackened people, right? Like they were all Africans, right? But the repatriated folks saw the Indigenous Africans as quote unquote savages, right? And then the Indigenous Africans saw these repatriated African Americans as dark-skinned white men, right? So that was really the question that kind of attracted me to studying this, right? Because how can these folks see each other so differently, right? And what does that tell us about race? So really broadly speaking, I'm interested in thinking about questions of race and questions of Blackness and how they structure our modern world and how they structure politics.
Wow, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Especially the kind of how individuals view like identity of others despite coming from the same race.
Right? Right? Because it's like, how can you look at someone who's the same skin color as you and racialize them differently?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that really disrupts everything that we think about race.
Yeah. Right? There's reminds me of the phrase like diaspora.
Yeah.
This is a massive self-indulgent tangent, but I was like last year I was in Nepal away for
I heard it's beautiful.
Yeah, it was great. It was beautiful, but I met a lot of other South Asian individuals naturally because I was in Nepal, and a lot of people, when they like kind of say something to me and I respond back in English, like kind of take a moment of like surprise because I kind of very much blended in, and that was a strange experience, especially compared to the UK, whereas my home is the UK, but then there's also in some ways more at home.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
right. It's fascinating, right? Because they read you differently based on where you are, right? Yeah. And I don't know if they subsequently treated you differently.
Well, I found the hiking a lot harder than I think they expected for a native, and then I definitely was thought of an insider as one of them, but then they realised as an outsider. Yeah, it was interesting.
That's weird. I think especially for diasporic folks, right? Because you're always like an insider outsider.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter where you go.
Yeah. 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 No. Yeah. Exactly. Um, so, on your research interest and kind of going back to the courses at Cambridge, HSPS, are there opportunities at an undergrad level to study politics revolving around the Caribbean or Africa?
Absolutely. So there is a third-year course called the Politics of Africa, right? And I teach that. I teach that second term, right? And then first term it's taught by Sheriff Srinivasan. So he teaches the kind of Africa component, and then I teach the global anti-Blackness component. So we look at everything, or it's called global Black resistance. So we look at everything from, the continent to the diaspora, all over the Caribbean, all over the Americas, right? So that's an opportunity in your third year, and then you have the comparative politics course in your second year. And I teach the comparative politics of Liberia and Sierra Leone there.
Nice. And I always kind of have like an allergic reaction of like the phrase African studies, because it kind of homogenizes a whole continent. But if someone wants to kind of study the subtlety between different nations or a specific nation, is there opportunity to do that at Cambridge?
Absolutely, yeah. Like the course is actually structured around different case studies, different countries. It's very particular and nuanced in that way, right? And then obviously there's the Center for African Studies, right? In the politics department, of course, like that is a master's level place. Like you can do a master's there, right? But you can also just spend time there, right? And kind of engage with folks who are working on the topic.
Nice. Yeah, that's really exciting. And last question we have is, so like kind of summing up everything that we've been talking about, if an applicant wants to study politics, but kind of cutting edge contemporary politics and political theory, not necessarily sticking to the Western canon, would Cambridge be a good place for them to come?
I think so. I think this is a question that largely depends on the kinds of courses that you choose to take, right? So if you choose to take a course with me, then, we study everything from, I always say that politics starts from the ground up, right? Not, theory doesn't come from the top down, right? So we really start with, real people's lives, right? And then go from there. And I think, that is very distinct from the ways in which most courses that are focused on theory are taught. But it's very much a Black feminist practice, right? And a feminist practice, right? The personal is political. So I think, it's definitely a place that you would have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah. And would you find other individuals who want to study politics from the bottom up rather than the theory down?
What do you mean?
Kind of individuals who...
Like, are you talking about like colleagues?
Yeah, or students, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's so many students here that are interested, and I think this generation of students specifically, with the kind of wealth of information that's now available online, I think there's a kind of political priviness that, other students of other generations might have not had in the same way, right? So I think that community is definitely here. And there's also a community of scholars and lecturers, right, who do the same thing, right? There's like CRASH, right, which is, I forget what it stands for, but it's basically critical humanities, right? And they offer funding for all kinds of projects that focus on these questions.
Nice. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Ola, for a really interesting podcast on studying politics at Cambridge.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. And thank you for the viewers for watching. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And if there are any podcasts that we haven't done that you'd like us to do, let us know. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
Oh my God. Did I butcher that?
No, that was great.
Are you sure?
No, I'm absolutely sure.
All right.